I'd like to welcome all of you. My name's Claudia Briggs, and I'm with the California Teachers Association. And we're lucky, fortunate to have with us today Jeff Guerin with Heart Research, who conducted this research just in the last few weeks. We also have, he will be talking, starting off for us. We have Sasha Shane, who is an Oakland and Bay Area parent advocate and representative, who's also raised children of her own family. She will be talking to us, as well as Matthew Schneck from San Diego, who will be sharing the student experience, and talk a little bit about his experience in terms of safety. And then we have Marisela Velasquez, who's a parent from Fresno, who will be speaking to us as well about experiences there. And so I just want to go ahead and say to the media outlets who are asking us, yes, you have our permission to record. I believe Erica was putting that in there. And when you do come on, thank you in advance for putting your name and your media outlet as your screen ID. So without further ado, we will go ahead and get started. Jeff, why don't you go ahead and take it away? Thank you.
Thank you, Claudia, and hi, everybody. I am look forward to sharing the results of research that we have just completed for the CTA with representative cross sections of registered voters across California and parents who also are registered voters. Let me begin to share my screen. And so we were in the field with this research between March 9th and March 16th. So this is hot off the press. We interviewed a representative cross-section of 1,839 registered voters across the state. We have a separate sample of 661 public school parents, and some of those include additional oversample interviews we did. The research was conducted both by phone and online. We used the phone interviews to make sure that we were having a appropriately inclusive sample. So the phone interviews were conducted in the zip codes that represented the communities, the 25% of the state with the lowest income, who may not have the same capacity to participate in an online survey. And we're confident that the results we're sharing today are representative of what you would hear if you talk to the registered voters and parents broadly. This is very important research because it presents a different view than I think is being seen in the media. Certainly a more nuanced, a more nuanced view than you often hear. And that's particularly true with communities of color who have had more severe experiences with the coronavirus pandemic. Just in general, though, we'll start off with a bit of good news, which is voters, compared to the last time we did a comparable survey for the CTA, voters and parents both in California are feeling more upbeat about the overall direction of the state. 54% of voters now say California is going in the right direction. That represents a majority, whereas in our previous poll, only 38% said the state was going in the right direction. And we see an even more dramatic change among parents about a feeling that things are going in the right direction. That's partly a reflection of a decline in the sense that the coronavirus is starting to be under control. When we did our previous survey back in September, by a 26-point margin, voters in the state and parents in the state said that coronavirus was still a serious problem where they lived, rather than being pretty well under control. Still, in both populations, we have majorities saying that coronavirus is still a serious problem, but smaller majorities than we measured previously. And some of those who say it's still a serious problem think it will be under control in the next foreseeable period of time. One of the things that is important to note here is that among parents we interviewed, we asked them whether they were satisfied or dissatisfied with their children's education in the current school year. And while I think you hear a lot of unhappy parents in the news, that's not the picture that we're getting in our representative sampling of parents, whereby 65 to 34 parents say that they are more satisfied than dissatisfied with their child's education so far this school year. That's true across various ethnicities. It's lower among AAPI parents, but across grade levels, and you see fairly substantial majorities saying that they are satisfied for the most part with their child's education so far this year. In addition to that, we also find that both voters and even more so parents approve of the way local school districts have handled decisions about whether, when, and how schools should reopen for in-person instruction. So among voters, you can see by 62 to 34, they are expressing approval of the decisions that schools have made. Among parents, by 70 to 29, they are expressing approval of the decisions that schools have made. White non-Hispanic parents are more likely than others to express approval, but it's very clear majorities across races and ethnicities in terms of approval. So while I think you hear the kind of the negative parents more frequently in the news, in reality, they are the exception and not the rule. And one thing that hasn't changed is that the preeminent priority among both voters and parents when it comes to the question of whether, when, and how to reopen schools for in-person instruction is to keep students, staff, and families as safe as possible, rather than getting students back into classrooms as soon as possible. And this is by a very decisive margin among all voters statewide, by 72 to 27. They should say that preeminent priority needs to be keeping students, staff, and families as safe as possible. A very similar result among parents at 75%, saying that should be the priority. So that parents may want to get their children back into classrooms, but in terms of weighing one thing against another, they are much more focused on making sure that students, staff, and families are as safe as possible. I noted earlier that most parents and voters approve of the district's decisions their local school districts have been making about reopening schools for in-person instruction. We asked both groups here whether schools in their local schools are opening at the right pace, or reopening too quickly, or are reopening too slowly. And here, among voters, the plurality position among both groups is that schools are opening at the right pace. There are voters who think that something is off here, but they are among voters pretty evenly split between saying that schools are reopening too quickly rather than opening too slowly. And among parents, it's just 23% who say that their schools are opening too slowly, so that is not a dominant view at all. And a larger group, a third of parents, say that their local public schools are opening too quickly. Here, and this is a theme that we'll see played out throughout the remaining results, is that there are substantial differences by race and ethnicity. So you can see parents of color, whether they are Hispanic, Asian, or Black, are very often say that their schools are opening too quickly, not too slowly, whereas white non-Hispanic parents, by a very small margin, are more likely to say that they are opening too slowly rather than too quickly. But among white parents, it is still a minority of 31% who say that schools are opening too slowly. This is good news that there's increasing confidence among parents that the schools right now are safe for in-person instruction. So when we asked parents this question back in September, only 35% said that they were very or fairly confident that their local public schools were safe right now for in-person instruction, and that has risen to 47%. And there's been a decline from 42% to 28% in the percentage of parents who say that they are not at all confident, not that confident, or not confident at all. So we are seeing a change here. I would note that it's still less than a majority of parents who are confident that their local public schools can reopen safely at this moment. But it's certainly moving in that direction. And one thing we asked, we don't have a slide for it, but we also asked our respondents, well, how about a month from now? And that adding a month does not add much more confidence. You can see among parents that dads are a little bit more confident than moms are, that schools are safe right now. Republican voters are more confident than other voters are, other parents are. And again, you see this very dramatic difference by racial and ethnic lines, where 62% of white parents say, I feel confident that my local schools are safe right now. And whereas far fewer parents of color, again, whether they're Hispanic, AAPI, or Black, are willing to express that kind of confidence in the safety of their local public schools at this moment. And you can see in LA County, there is less confidence as well in terms of that schools are safe right now. We asked a kind of a related question, which is, would you be comfortable sending your child to school for in-person instruction at this time? And again, we're seeing an improving situation, whereas the percentage of parents who said they would feel comfortable has risen from 38% to 58%. So that's significant. But again, you see this very dramatic difference by race and ethnicity. 3/4 of white parents say that they would definitely or probably feel comfortable sending their children to school right now for in-person instruction, but it drops by a substantial degree among parents of color. And there are some differences by area of the state. In San Diego and Orange County, and in the kind of smaller media markets, voters tend to be a little bit more, parents tend to be a little bit more confident. Those tend to be more Republican areas, and there's definitely a political dimension to this. With all of that improvement in parents saying that they feel confident in and comfortable about sending their kids back to school, it is very important to note that when we ask what's worrying parents more right now about their child's schooling, that their child might fall behind academically if they're only offered remote learning and no in-person instruction, or that their child might get infected at school or bring the virus home with him or her. And you can see, even in this context of growing confidence, parents are more concerned about the possibility that their child will get infected or bring the infection home than they are about their child falling behind academically. White parents are evenly divided on that question, but parents of color, by very large margins, tend to be more concerned. And again, parents of color tend to live in communities that have been more severely affected by the virus. Parents of color are far more likely to be concerned that their child might get infected at school or bring the virus home with them. And in I think a kind of a very important finding, we told people when schools reopen, you'll still have the option of having your child participate in remote learning from home or attending classes in person at school. And parents are evenly divided about what they're going to do in that circumstance. Only 48% said, if that's my choice, I'm going to send my child to school. And 51% said, I'm more inclined to participate in remote learning from home. There are a couple of things at play here. There's these safety concerns are significant, but we've also heard in qualitative research that parents have logistical concerns about getting their children back and forth from school. Again, we're seeing the same very substantial difference between white parents and parents of color in these results. And we can also, but even among white parents, who many of whom say that that they're confident, 40% of them say they're inclined to keep their kids at home for remote learning. And for high school parents are more inclined to keep their kids at home. We asked voters about what they think should happen with schools at the elementary level in their district, elementary level, middle schools, and at the high school level, whether they should be fully should they be fully open for in-person instruction, open on a hybrid or mixed model of some in-person learning and some remote learning, or remote learning only. One thing that is notable here is that it doesn't really matter what kind of school that we're talking about. It is a relatively small minority who think that that schools at any level should be fully open for in-person instruction and that and only offering in-person instruction. The center of gravity is more with a hybrid approach, but there are more voters at each level of school say that schools should be remote only than say that they should be in person only. We also are able to look at this question by the kind of schools their own children among parents, based on the kind of schools their own children attend. So you can see among elementary school parents, they are generally supportive of hybrid education and some in-person instruction. Only 29% of elementary school parents say their school should operate on a remote teaching only basis. But at the middle school level and the high school level, we do have substantial minorities of parents who say, I want my kid's school should only be open on a remote basis. So 40% of middle school parents say my middle school should be operating on a remote only basis. 40% of high school parents say high school should be operating on a remote only basis. There is a kind of recognition, and we've seen this in our previous polling, that schools should only be allowed to reopen if they've made major changes to prevent the spread of coronavirus. So reopening is not going back to the way things were, but parents are expecting and really demanding a new normal in terms of safety and safety precautions in schools. and that's true across race and ethnicity among parents. And there's some recognition that schools need more resources in order to provide the level of safety that's necessary. There's agreement among both voters and parents that schools should only be open for in-person instruction after teachers have had a chance to get vaccinated. 71% of voters and 63% of parents feel that way. One of the things that where there's probably the greatest disparity between what voters and parents believe and the public policy conversation that's going on is that there's a broad consensus that schools that are in the purple zone in terms of their transmission rates should not be open. And that's kind of the debate we're having, is what should happen in the purple zone. But in the red zone, where there's apparently no longer kind of much of a conversation, majorities of both parents and voters say if they're in red zones, they should not be open. So here, the conversation that's going on is a little bit different from where the public's at. Then when you get into orange and yellow zone, both parents and majorities of parents and voters say in those circumstances, schools can be open for in-person instruction. In terms of who voters trust about whether, how, and when schools should open, the politicians, the state politicians are kind of down at the bottom. When we had asked previously about President Trump, he was at a much lower position than President Biden is now. But still, public health experts are highly respected, as are teachers. People really rely and respect on the views of teachers on the question of whether, how, and when schools should reopen. In our previous poll, we're actually measuring, not everybody recognizes the name of the California Teachers Association, but we have measured among parents and actually an increasing respect and reliance for what the California Teachers Association has to say. So as this conversation has progressed, the appreciation for the position of the California Teachers Association has increased, not decreased. We're not measuring any kind of anti-union backlash in any shape, form, or fashion. And in fact, and I'll end here. Thank you for your patience. We asked what voters and parents, what their perception is of teachers, that they're willing to reopen schools as long as the appropriate safety precautions are in place, or they're not willing to reopen schools and have insisted on unnecessary safety precautions, or they don't know enough to say. There are, a third of parents and close to a quarter of a third of voters and close to a quarter of parents say, I don't really know. But to the extent that voters or parents have an assessment of what teachers are doing, overwhelmingly they say teachers have been willing to reopen schools as long as the appropriate safety precautions are in place. If you just base the percentages on those with an opinion, it would be 71% of all voters put teachers in that category, willing to reopen under as long as the appropriate safety precautions are in place, and 76% of parents who express an opinion come down on that side, rather than saying that teachers have been unwilling to reopen schools and have been insisting on unnecessary precautions. So with that, Claudia, thank you, and let me turn the program back to you.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you so much, Jeff, for that. Obviously, a lot of information here, but to recap, we're seeing that as in-person teaching and learning resumes across the state in the midst of the pandemic, parents are more confident about sending their kids back to school, but certainly remain concerned about safety. And they say safety rather than speed should be guiding the reopening of classrooms. Of course, as we heard Jeff say, the findings were particularly pronounced amongst parents of color. So with that, we'll go ahead and turn it over to Marisela Velasquez, who is a parent from Fresno. Marisela, thank you for being here. Please go ahead.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for inviting me to participate in this event today. Again, my name is Marisela Velasquez, and I am a mother of 4 in Fresno, California. Our community has been hit very hard by COVID-19, and we as a community have endured a lot of heartbreak. We've lost a lot of families, members, and friends. And even though the virus is a little bit more under control and some vaccines are being administered, there's still fear of getting sick at schools and then bringing it home to our family members. Prior to COVID-19 or the pandemic, I have volunteered in my children's classrooms. And I know that sometimes kids don't listen, right? They put their fingers in their mouth, they're touching everything, touching their eyes. And so it's hard for them sometimes to just listen to instructions. So expecting them to keep their masks on or socially distance or continue to wash their hands is going to be a challenge. And that's a hard ask for them. And it's not going to be easy. But it's also hard for me to trust that schools will be able to keep my children safe. As many times, I don't know in other parts of California, but I know that in my school district, many a times I'm asked to provide simple things as Kleenex, tissue papers, paper towels, Windex, Clorox wipes. We're asked to provide all of this for our kids. So I want to make sure that our school districts are going to do what we need to do in terms of safety measures and making sure that our classrooms are safe so that our kids do not get sick while at school. And then again, bringing that back to our families. And in fact, I do know that many parents do not want to send their children back to in-person learning, but want to remain virtual for that same reason, that we just don't know that safety measures are going to be followed. I feel that things are moving too fast, and that's why I'm keeping a close eye on safety measures and making sure that they are being followed at my school and that everything is going to be done to keep our kids safe and our teachers as well. We need more people vaccinated before fully returning to in-person learning. And we've come too far to let our guard down and to end up where we were just a few weeks ago. This pandemic has not been easy on any of us. I can tell you as a parent of these kids that are doing distance learning and having to learn all of the different platforms that they're using all the different apps, and every school is different, every grade level is different. So it's been challenging for me, especially as a full-time mom. I'm also working from home and having to do my own responsibilities at work and still being able to do that and help my child has been a struggle. But I can tell you that, I have been working with our teachers at that level, and how can I help my child to make sure that they are getting all the information that they need, getting their work done, and making sure they're still at the level that they need to be. And the other thing I'd like to talk about is that we just need to work together as a community, working with our teachers, working with our staff and administrators, and just making sure that these safety measures are being followed. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Marisela. Appreciate your comments there. We'll go ahead and go to Sasha Shane now. Sasha, go right ahead.
Awesome. Thank you. First of all, thank you so much for having me. My name is Sasha Shane. I am the senior parent organizer with Bay Area Plan. I'm also a student at Holy Names University here in Oakland, and I'm going to school to become a teacher. So thank you so much for having me. So first and foremost, I just want to say that Bay Area Plan has worked really hard with the community because we understand that communities of color were really impacted by COVID-19. And so we changed completely our strategy by increasing the number of organizers, providing financial support for those families who unfortunately lost their jobs, didn't get um, their unemployment on time, things of that nature. So we created the Family Thriving Fund, and that was very important for our community. In addition to that, we launched our campaign called Keep Our Kids Safe campaign, which is essentially asking for more resources. Again, quality distance learning is also one of our priorities as families, as well as a safe return to school. We're not saying keep the doors closed, but we want to make sure that those who decide to send their children to school have the opportunity to make sure that their kids will be as safe as possible. Some of our families have already volunteered to do some of the inspections, to do the walkthroughs with their union. And so we're very happy to see that the community is coming together to really ensure that kids have the safe space. We've also been fighting for language access. We are a multicultural organization that works with families who speaks English, obviously, and Spanish and Arabic and many other languages. So we want to continue to fight for that, and just to make sure that families are engaged in the process of the reopening, right? We want to make sure that parents' voices are lifted, and not just some voices, but all of the voices. Um, and I just wanted to share a little bit of so I was an active participant in raising my nieces and nephews. I was member of the SSC, and many other things that I did to engage in the school, because I understand that it takes a village to raise a child. And to be honest, as an organizer, I was affected by COVID-19 personally. My parents both are undocumented, and unfortunately, um, contracted COVID-19 through my nephew, who's 7 years old, who, was playing around, went outside, met one of his friends, and unfortunately got COVID. And my parents were really, really sick. And at that moment, even though I'm an organizer, I started to freak out, because it's like, what do I do now? How do I help my family? My parents are over 60 years old. And I was really, really concerned. Now with this reopening, I'm really concerned that my niece and nephews will have to go back to school, and this can happen again. And we just don't know if it could be worse the next time around. So um, I just want to say that we want to lift those voices of people of color who are concerned. There are undocumented families, there are Black families who unfortunately do not have access. I have to fight for my family to get um, the COVID-19 test. And so imagine me as an organizer having some level of advocacy for myself and for my families. I still had to fight for those resources. I want to make sure that those families are not found in those circumstances moving forward, and that we continue to listen to our families. And if they say that they're not ready to go back to school, I have one of the parents that I organized with. Her name is um, Josefina Flores, whose child has a pre-existing condition. And she's saying, I know my child is sad. I know my child wants to go back to school, but I have to do what's best for her. And for now, she will stay at home. And she's not the only story that I'm hearing from our families. We have multiple families who are saying, even though my child is going to fall back academically, it's okay. We have to recognize there's a pandemic out there, and that we need to follow the guidance. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the time.
Oh, thank you. And I hope that your parents are on the mend and taking the care that they need, and that they found the resources and the help. We know that there are heartbreaking stories out there similar to theirs. So thank you for sharing that. And we go now to Matthew Schneck. Matthew teaches in San Diego, and I won't even waste more time introducing him, because he's awesome on his own. So take it away, Matthew. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm Matthew Schneck. I teach social studies at East Village High School in San Diego, California. And so just like parents, my biggest concern is student safety. I am so excited to return to see kids' faces instead of black boxes on a screen. But as the only adult in the room, I have to ensure that not only are my students learning both at home and at school, but that I do everything within my power to keep kids safe. So that means I have to make sure kids stay distanced, that they keep their masks on, that I keep my classroom well ventilated. And so all this week, teachers have been going onto campus in my district to prepare for the return of kids in just a few weeks, measuring out desks, ensuring that, that we're ready when the kids arrive. That's because we want to ensure that when kids come into our rooms, they're going to be well cared for. Throughout the last year, I've had dozens of students tell me about how COVID has traumatized their families. When you have many kids that live in multi-generational households with so many parents being essential workers, it affects every member of that household. I still check in weekly with a student who is struggling with his grief after the loss of his grandfather, his abuelo. All 8 members of his household contracted the virus, and COVID took just 1. It has left him struggling to complete his schoolwork. So I asked him if he might plan to return to in-person instruction. And he wanted to know what we are doing to keep things safe. That was the first thing on this high school student's mind. And so I went over the safety guidelines. Your teachers are vaccinated, and there's evidence that that can reduce the transmission of the virus. We have air purifiers to ensure adequate ventilation since COVID is airborne. We have masks for students and staff, daily symptom checks, surveillance testing for all students, since we know that many kids are asymptomatic and or present asymptomatically. And we need to know if COVID, if there are outbreaks in our schools. Our desks are distanced by 5 or 6 feet. Teachers are doing everything in our power to keep kids safe by working with our unions to get these safety measures into our contracts. And then we have to make sure that districts provide the safety measures they promised and are held accountable. So as we've long said, teacher working conditions are also students' learning conditions. We all have a responsibility to work together to keep our kids safe.
Thank you, Matthew, so much. Lisa, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you for questions that we are receiving.
Yes, so just a reminder to everyone to please put your questions in the chat. And that's how we will be responding to questions you have right now. So this is a question from Laura with Sacramento Bee. Knowing what we know about where schools are now, how vaccine distribution is going, and how a declining positivity rate, how comfortable are you with the idea? I'm sorry, I'm having trouble scrolling. This is a long question. Let's see.
With the idea
How
of fully returning to
comfortable
school.
are you with the idea of fully returning to school in the fall? Should I read that again?
Well, I'll go ahead and start, but then I do want to hear from our parents and Matthew, from you, of course. We're hearing that in real time, or just moments ago, the governor has announced that they are expanding vaccines and the tiering. So I believe it's for adults older than 50. Just above, yeah, older than 50 and up, beginning April 1st, and then all those who are 16 and older on April 15th, formerly tax day. So they, that's good news. I mean, supply seems to be coming, and you know, we're thrilled about the news. So, you know, as long as we can continue to, you know, on that path, get everybody vaccinated and ensure that the school districts have in place the multi-layered safety measures, all things point to a successful reopening in the return as well in the fall. Of course, as we know, a lot of folks are concerned, and so it would be really important to, for comfort levels, to also provide that hybrid option and distance learning option for any who may have those concerns. But we don't see that. We see today's news as encouraging good news. Marisela, what do you think?
I mean, I agree exactly with what you're saying, Claudia. And I think that the only thing I'd also just add is that we also need to make sure that as parents, that we also follow those safety protocols, and that if we know that our kids are also experiencing some of those symptoms, you know, if they have the, you know, the sniffles or whatnot, maybe just take that precaution and keep their kids at home instead of just sending them over, even though that may just be allergies. I think that we as parents also need to be responsible, in addition to the school districts and the teachers. So that would just be the only thing that I'd like to add.
Thank you. Matthew, what about you?
Considering that more high schoolers are going to be able to receive the vaccine, makes me very confident about this fall. Also, just having the summer to continue to, I mean, we're doing what we need to do right now as we continue to see case levels decrease. So I think that it gives us a lot of time to continue the safety measures that we're already following and to keep those in place as we go into the fall. The only thing I wanted to add though is there is absolutely going to be parents, and I've spoken to them, that will not be comfortable sending their child in the fall. And so there does need to be options for those students that doesn't simply just rely on, simulcast teaching, in my opinion.
Thank you. Lisa, I'll send it back.
Sounds good. We have a couple more questions. This one comes from Howard Bloom with the LA Times. His question is, once a union local reaches a reopening agreement with its district, to what extent, if any, should teachers be urging parents to return their children to campus? I'll throw that to you, Claudia.
Can you repeat that, please? I'm sorry.
Yeah, so the question is, once a union local reaches a reopening agreement with its district, to what extent, if any, should teachers urge parents to return their children to campus?
Well, obviously, Howard, as you're seeing here, returning is a very personal choice. As you know, communities have been impacted very differently. And in particular for your readers and your coverage area in Los Angeles, a community that is still grappling with the after effects of COVID-19. So I think it's not going to be about urging folks. It's going to be about all of us doing our part to ensure that safety is a priority, to ensure that the safety measures are in place, and that we're all doing our part to make sure that schools and classrooms are safe, which in and of itself will allow people the comfort level and the confidence that they need to want to send their children back to school. Thank you for that question.
And we have a quick question from the Chronicle who wants, this is for you, Jeff, the margin of error in the poll.
Margins of error are calculated differently for polls that use mixed methodologies, as this one does. But with a sample of the size that we used for the voter survey, the margin of error would be around plus or minus 3%, a little bit lower. And then for the parent universe, it's plus or minus 4%, a little higher.
Thank you. So we have a question here from Saddam with Univision, and he would like this answer in Spanish, if possible. So the question is there any relation between voters and parents of color being more inclined to a slow reopening and the fact that these communities have been the most impacted by the coronavirus in the number of cases and deaths?
Well, I think that's a question that I'd like for us to have Jeff respond to, and then Marisela, if you can translate, his response in your words, that would be great. Go ahead.
And please don't just translate, add from your experience, which I think will be important and powerful. Yes, we definitely see in the poll that there's a relationship between the kind of these concerns and then just a general sense of worry that that someone in their family might get infected with the coronavirus. So we have strong reason to believe that these concerns about schools are very much related to experiences with COVID and ongoing concerns with COVID, which are great, substantially greater among parents of color, and it's still at a significant level.
Sí, estamos viendo que sí hay una relación entre estas inquietudes y preocupaciones que algunos miembros de la familia pueden ser afectadas por COVID. También sabemos que hay muchas preocupaciones por experiencia con la enfermedad o con la pandemia, y sabemos también que esto ocurre mucho más en nuestras comunidades, comunidades de color, especialmente cuando nosotros sabemos que tenemos muchos familiares, especialmente en nuestros hogares. A veces tenemos a la abuelita, tenemos a nuestros nietos, a tíos. No nomás es la mamá y el papá y los hijos, sino que tenemos muchas generaciones con nosotros, porque cuidamos de uno a otro. Entonces, por eso es que estamos preocupados como padres mandar a nuestros hijos a clases presenciales hasta que veamos que las vacunas funcionen un poquito más, y también de que las escuelas tomen las medidas precautivas para la salud de nuestros hijos, porque no queremos que nuestros hijos contraigan la virus y luego no los traigan a nuestras familias o nuestros abuelos y tíos. Eso sería lo único que quisiera agregar acerca de esto. Gracias.
Claudia, may I add one other point to my comments? It's
Yes.
not just people's experience with COVID, but sense of access to the vaccine. And what we see in our polling, we didn't present a slide on this, is that white parents are much more likely to think they will be able to get the vaccine soon than parents of color do. So this is both kind of reflection of kind of a backward-looking experiences with COVID, but also forward-looking expectations in terms of vaccine access. And one way to increase the willingness of parents of color to send their children to school is to be much more intentional about making sure the vaccine is available in communities of color.
Okay, it's going to go ahead and move on to our next question. This is Howard Bloom again with the LA Times. Any feelings about the Return to School Summit from the Biden administration yesterday, which pushed hard to assert that schools can be opened quickly and safely? Curious about your take on that. Claudia?
Sure. So, we know that from the beginning, President Biden has been eager to get students and educators back into classrooms in those cases where they haven't yet been back. And, educators agree from the beginning. Teachers, support professionals, and other school staff have been wanting to return to school and offering up suggestions and ideas on how to do that safely. And so we do. I mean, like you heard Matthew say, he can't wait. He's excited to be back with his students, and that is the sentiment generally across the board. Educators have missed their students. We hear constantly about the fatigue and the being tired of the little black boxes that we all see all day long. And so they're excited to be in there with them, to experience those aha moments, those getting them, meeting them where they are, reaching them where they are, and giving them all the support as they move toward that recovery and learning recovery and resiliency. So the Biden administration points to the CDC guidance, and the CDC guidance is clear about the vaccines, is clear about the multi-layered measures that must be in place in order for schools to be safe. And so, you know, we are thankful for the funding that is coming to classrooms. He even encourages that more staff, more personnel is added. And that's exactly, you know, what communities, local communities need to be talking about, what a safe return looks like, with input from parents, from educators, from administrators who know the unique needs of their local communities. So, you know, we're looking forward to getting back into classrooms with our students and appreciate the work that President Biden has done, and others. So thank you, Lisa. Do we have any more questions?
We have one more question about whether there was any question in the poll relating to the mental health of students or parents.
There wasn't specifically in this poll. And one thing I'd add, Howard, to Claudia's answer is that, you know, open is no longer just sort of a yes or no question. It's open how. So for parents, they make a pretty substantial distinction between fully reopening, no remote learning versus reopening on a hybrid basis. And right now, the majority of parents think schools should be open in some form or fashion, but are much more likely to think that schools should be open on a hybrid basis than to be fully reopened.
And thank you for that clarification, because I was just going to in person, but you're right. I mean, absolutely, hybrid, as we saw in the polling, is key. We're going to go to Sasha now. She will add just a little bit more, Lisa, and then we'll go back.
Sí, muchísimas gracias. He visto que muchas personas están aquí también que hablan español y quería hablar un poquito sobre la experiencia de la que hablé anteriormente, que era de que mis papás son inmigrantes indocumentados de México. Los recursos tal vez están disponibles, pero también tenemos que reconocer que hay un tipo de miedo que existe de poder tener acceso a estos diferentes recursos, y también que nosotros en la comunidad latina, como ya se explicó, tenemos personas que ya son adultos. Entonces tenemos que tener un poquito más de cuidado. Muchas familias con las que estamos trabajando, tenemos grupos latinos que están trabajando directamente para asegurarse de que las familias tengan acceso a la información también en español, porque ha sido bien difícil el proceso de que tal vez muchos recursos se están dando, pero desafortunadamente por el idioma ha sido difícil tener acceso a ellos. So I was just speaking back to the experience of my family as a undocumented family who also has elderlies in their home, and it's very difficult for us to sometimes access these resources. Even if they are available, it's really hard to be able to inquire or go and receive those services, because there's not always language access, or the language is not, and when I mean language access, it's not only that it's translated into Spanish or that there's an interpretation, but that is actually accessible to our community.
Thank you so much to all of you.